The robot voice has made it so. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to the March session of the World I/O Forum. Today, we are focused on I/O psychology and organizational culture. And we have the wonderful guest of Paula Brockwell to be speaking about organizational culture, both talking about research and practice. I'm very excited to hear from her. Going to give us a few more updates about how this normally goes so that we're aware of norms before we dive right in, and I hand things over to Paula. So we do once a month. We have a different session, typically panel style. This is pretty special because Paul is with us today. That we'll go ahead and have people from a specific industry or area of professional world talking about how IO psychology shows up. So previously we've done independent consulting, and we talked about how not just working with a firm, but when you go off on your own, how IO psychology allows additional opportunities and variety in people's work that they do. For today, we're focused on organizational culture, specifically with that IO perspective and with the emphasis on research and applied work. So much when we're talking about culture, it comes down to sentimentality. Nothing wrong with sentimentality. Sentimentality is great. I love it too. But how do we make sure that culture is more than that and that we're actually helping businesses as well? That's Paula's area of expertise, and I'm very excited to hear from her. Before we switch over to her, again, here's the slide to say, look, she's an expert in all these things, but you're about to hear from her as well. So I'm just going to skip ahead to there are other opportunities to be involved in IO psychology as well. If I'm going to go ahead and paste a few links into the chat to highlight some of these, we have Psychology at Work, which is who we're working with when we do these events. For years, they have run similar online events in the first place. They have focused on different topics with different experts. So as much fun as this is, there's also years of conversations like this that you're able to find on their YouTube page. We'll share the link in just a second. Also, every Thursday night, US time, is the IO Psychology pop-up group led by Lee Krausen. Far more informal. No one's recording anything, just a bunch of IOs from different areas who are able to informally chat and talk about what they're seeing, both professionally and personally. It's very fun, and every week is a different vibe. PsyOp is coming up, as many people know, and whether you are going to PsyOp or not, there are pre-conference calls happening where people just want to make sure that they're networking and aware of what's going on in the industry right now. We'll share a link for that. And then lastly, next month's session, same as this one, panel style instead, will be focused on healthcare, both with panelists from the US and the UK being able to compare notes and talking about not how healthcare is different, but how the role of IO psychology is different in each of these spaces. So we'll share those links in just a second. And there's the panel for the healthcare. That said, you're not here for me, you're here for Paula. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, shut up, and get excited to listen. Paula, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. And now I know that this is normally a panel session. You never know what I might do in terms of a bit of audience participation. We might turn it into that. So we all know that I'm Danny Wareham's number one fan, professional stalker. Shall we call me that, Danny? I think that's probably the best way to go, isn't it? So you never know when I might call in for some views. And Jonathan, now I know that this is your area of expertise. Maybe we'll have a play with some stuff as we go. Well, listen, thank you so much for allowing me to join you this evening for me in the UK. Like Danny, I'm in my end of the day attire. I've got my hoodie on already. But I'm glad that you've seen a picture of me when I've washed my face and brushed my hair, because you know that it is actually possible that I can be palatable to the public on things. In terms of what I wanted to talk to you about today, I think for me, I guess what I wanted to do was share with you the foundations of our approach when it comes to culture change and activation, but also host a bit of a conversation, if I'm completely honest, around our role as psychologists in trying to move the world of cultural practice forward. Because if you've checked if I was worth talking to about this stuff, you won't have had to get very deep into my LinkedIn profile to hear me grumbling about the most commonly used ways of trying to adopt are trying to adapt and evolve culture moving forward. So while I've got a huge amount of respect for a lot of the work that's happening out there, I also have a huge amount of challenge that I think we have an opportunity as professionals to bring in terms of moving things forward. So I'm just going to be honest about that as we go. So in terms of just kind of who I am. My background is I've been a consultant my whole professional life, specializing in the area of culture for the last 15 years, I would say 10 to 15 years, but having done all of the things that we do through our career as consultant psychologists, from assessment selection to leadership development, etc. And in that time, as a natural kind of broader thinker, always saying, but why? For what purpose? And what are we actually trying to achieve in this organizations? What conditions are we trying to create? And I think that's what led me into the world of cultural practice, really, was even when I was designing an assessment program for an executive, I wouldn't just want to know what the job description said. I wanted to know, well, what's the strategic plan for this organization? And what's the operating context? And what does that mean in terms of the type of leadership that you need moving forward? So I've been doing this for a very long time. And I always operated from a position of thinking that as a practitioner who very much does go back to the evidence every now and then, but has an ADHD brain. So the minute that I read the evidence, I absorb it and I eject the bits of detail, like what year is it from and who's the author, and just kind of use the detail of how I need to apply it. I always wondered through my practice of whether I was actually being driven by instinct rather than research. So one of the things I wanted to share with you, perhaps for your sanity as well as for my own, is that a couple of years ago, I came across this study when I did my probably 18 monthly panic that maybe I was just convincing myself of some things and I needed to go back to the research again, to really have a look at, well, what are the things that really influence effectively change culture? What is it that the research and the evidence is saying about things? And so I just wanted to share this quote from you from a meta-analysis that was completed in 2022. And I've had a look, and nothing, not that long ago, actually, I had a panic about things, and got a lovely big literature search done by a placement student who was working in our business with us, and nothing as robust and broad as this has been done since. But what it indicated was, actually, when it comes to influencing workplace culture, actually the reason that there is no single right answer, or there isn't, none of us necessarily always feel particularly confident that we've definitely got the things that we need to do on stuff, and lots of people are creating stuff that are anagrams or alliterations of, you know, whatever. I saw one today that was clarity, confidence, and something else, 4C's. Someone had built the model around and was trying to sell. No research, but, you know, it all rhymed or had some sort of alliteration, so it was worth it. But the reason that so much of that is around is that actually the vast majority of research that's been happening in culture over the last 20 years has focused much more on psychologists' obsessions. I'm one, I'm calling myself out as well as everyone else, on really nailing the model of measurement, of trying to understand exactly what this thing is and what typology does it fall into, and how do we actually how do we articulate what it is, to the detriment of actually evaluating what's driving those conditions in the first place, I would add, to what the research found, and also to the detriment of really knowing what interventions are likely to influence it. Now, I know it's more complex than that, because culture, influencing culture, is a bit like throwing lots of snooker balls onto a snooker table and assuming that you'll be able to predict exactly which balls will go into what pocket. It doesn't work that way. They bounce off each other and off the sides, etc. So I know it's not a 1+1 equals 2 equation when it comes to looking at the impact of interventions, but it certainly was a real call to action for me as I was in the review and build of our method as an organization, to say, you know what, we need to stop trying to reinvent what everyone else has done. And I personally wanted to ensure that we absolutely stayed away from that temptation to create another model for describing culture, and we started to focus on something quite different. So I went on a bit of a personal mission, if I'm honest. I started to build our method, not from a literature search, but actually from what I call my list of rage. I don't know how else to call it. I mean, we need to give it a slightly more palatable name. But as a practitioner
That
working
name
with
is
organizations,
perfect. The second I saw the handwritten note, all I could think was, I feel like I've been here 100
I was
times.
mad. Yeah, I was very mad. But what I wanted to do was think about what are the things that I either or when I was sitting with my teams in bigger consultancies, hearing them saying, well, it would have worked if they hadn't have done whatever. And noticing one of the things I really noticed as I left larger consultancy was how much time we as consultants, me included, were focusing on how organizations weren't using the things that we were giving them in the way that we intended them to or that we wanted them to. Things just didn't quite work out as we hoped. And instead of being curious about that, there's this settling of, well, of course, executives don't take responsibility for that. Well, of course, people get distracted with their day-to-day work. Of course, line managers are overwhelmed and they're not able to get this moving. It's that stuck, messy middle that everything always gets stuck in. And I think there's a real risk for us in-house or as consultants, but as practitioners, to see those norms as just as set. And in fact, there are things that we can influence around that. So I went on a bit of a journey. I started reading lots of things, and really what I did was look to other professions that I think have used our research, our insights, and our methods to better effect. So one of the things that irritates me endlessly is every time I go into a supermarket, I think of the fact that that kind of commercial behavioral scientists can literally predict how much stock is going to be bought of certain products by where they put it in the supermarket. You know, they have applied psychological theory and behavioral science and behavioral insights around how we can nudge and influence humans, that actually they know exactly the price of a particular shelf in a supermarket when it comes to working on different products. But in organizational culture, we still go, well, we'll do the training, but no, will it not? We're not quite sure. So I went on an adventure and I looked at things like public health, marketing, etc., to say where are we applying principles of mass behaviour change in a much more effective place. And I think one of the things that really caught my attention was systems thinking and that idea of understanding that individuals operate within an overall operating system. And going back to the quote that we all know from our early training on this, that every behaviour has a function, and if you really understand the system that someone is operating within, you're able to understand the function that the behavior that they have, and you're able to prime that environment in order to create systems that allow you to activate the behaviors that you need. So I think for me, there's this real call to action for us as psychologists to consider not just how do we do the morality piece of thinking about well-being and emotional health, etc., all important, but how do we really take our science brains, our systems brains, our true understanding of what drives behavior, not just sentiment and experience, but what drives behavior within organizations, to make sure that we are supporting the evolution of the world of work. Because I don't know if you agree with me or not, but the world of work is evolving, but the mode of work is not shifting. It's still 1982, maybe 1952. If you read Danny's book, some of what he talks about in terms of where current leadership models come from, I think you take it right back to Industrial Revolution days and some of the stuff that happened within the military, you know, and I agree with him, quite frankly. There's a reason I'm number one in his fan club on these things. But, you know, there is a real sense that that actually the modes that we're using to try and influence behavior and observe behavior are not fit for purpose for the modern world of work. So I've gone on a soapbox there. I'm going to talk more constructively in a moment. But since we're quite a small group, I'd be interested in people's reactions to that. Do you agree? Are you equally mad? Do you think that I need medicated? I'll take any responses that you think are appropriate. What do you think?
I think you're right, Paula. I My journey to IO was late in life. So I'd got 25, nearly 30 years of corporate experience before I went to university. Um, and I found psychology as a field can be a little classist at time and obsessed with models, and there's a reason that we can't agree on a definition of leadership or a definition of culture or a definition because we're so obsessed. We seem to be so obsessed with it.
Our name for what we are, even that's ridiculous.
Yeah, are we IOs? Are we business psychs? So the the most important question in business for me is so what? And I think the applied part is what matters. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What are we trying to change? What are we trying to amend? And if we're too busy arguing over definitions or models or acronyms, then we're kind of missing the whole point of the so what.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose one of the things that I really observe is that need, and again, I have a huge amount of respect for this, and I'm going to talk to you a bit in about our data-driven approach to really understanding culture drivers, because I absolutely believe in the worth of validated frameworks and evidence-based practice. I do believe that, and in the same breath, I would say that our obsession with quantifying and measuring everything means that we break things down into component parts to allow us to get the statistical analysis and the number that we want, that shows that what we've got is valid and robust. And I think at times what that means is that we're showing people a very stratified and simplified version of in individual parts of the problem, rather than really supporting business to look an opportunity as practitioners to uniquely support the work, to bring our value on that. Certainly not in the UK anyway. I could talk about that all day, but I'll not take you down that rabbit hole.
Do you mind
Are we
repeating
losing
that for a
sound?
couple seconds?
Did we lose sound? Was it just me?
Oh, we did lose sound.
Would you
We
repeat
lost
that
you,
last
Phil.
bit, Paula?
Oh,
I
sorry.
was I was here playing with mine thinking it was all me.
Oh,
Yeah.
apologies. Sorry, guys. I'll come closer. Although you're going to get a close up of my face, aren't you? If I come closer. What I was just saying is that I believe wholeheartedly in evidence-based practice and in ensuring that the frameworks, etc., that we're using are well tested and validated. But I also believe that we segment the world of work, so that we can get that independent to dependent variable connection really clean, so that we can do that analysis and make sure that things work. And I think that as psychologists, we've got this real opportunity to show the complexity and help the world of work to understand and hold that complexity in a way that no other profession can. But I think we're so obsessed with getting that end number, or that end statistical effect, that sometimes we oversimplify. And what we then do is accidentally reinforce that, well, this is a leadership development problem, yet let's use this model, or this is a selection problem, or the like. We break things into the employee life cycle rather than looking at the overall organizational ecosystem and how that blends together. So, my sense is that we have really unique value as a profession in terms of where the world of work is at the moment, and I'm not sure that we're always delivering that. What's people's thoughts on that? I'm interested. I'm taking you on a professional deep dive today, aren't I?
Oh
Sorry.
no.
It
Well, no, I
sounds
love it.
like an ode to Gestalt psychology. So some of the whole is greater than some of the parts, right? And something you said, every behavior has a function. That's very much a behavioral psychology perspective. And having a background in recreation therapy, transitioning from clinical to IO, being able to see some of those pieces come together and see the bigger picture is definitely more of a strategic point of view that I feel like you're hinting at here.
And
Yeah, totally agree. I totally agree. Glad it resonates. What about for others? Any thoughts, observations?
a lot of my background, so it comes from theater and then anthropology before we ever get into IO and business and a lot more of the numbers. And the anthropology has a tendency to use a lot of different methods and to be very qualitative. So it's the biggest shift into IO and business for me was, okay, yeah, I was told you got to be able to speak numbers, but wow, you got to actually speak numbers. So I'm very used to the idea of there's some reality that exists, and we're going to use 20 different lenses to better understand it. But then when it gets to, well, at the end of the day, you got to be able to measure employee success somehow, and the 20 different lenses can help you understand the situation. But if we're talking about promoting people or knowing who to help or what have you, suddenly it feels like this false binary of either you can have this qualitative, wiggly, wobbly gut feeling, or you can go with the numbers and only use the one exact approach. And I know it's not that binary, and I look forward to you blowing that out of the water, but it very much feels like you can get stuck in that area at times.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Well, look. So I guess I've been a bit provocative to start the conversation, because I want to frame some of what I'm talking about around this idea of how do we look at this more holistically. If you want to go down the rabbit hole that I did, I've just given you a slide here of some of the books that I worked my way through as I was just challenging my viewpoint on this and starting to play with it. And some of the stuff that I encourage some of the university professors in the UK to read more regularly when they tell me again that they're getting their students to use Hofstede's model again to look at culture, and that's all they're doing with him. So if you're interested in exploring some of this stuff, or you're in this world and you're thinking about a different lens, some of these tools might be good. I'd highly recommend Danny Wareham's book as well, as a slightly different lens on culture. Not because I'm obsessed with him, I promise. It is a really good read. I would definitely recommend that. Is that why you're here, Danny, to remind me to recommend your book? I do
Yeah, I'm
it
just
even when you're not
punting
about.
books.
I will say,
If it's
Danny,
Studio Pascal, you'll know
if
that
you
the
wanna
job's
go ahead
done.
and pop the link in the chat, I won't get angry.
Please do. I almost asked, like, who's the writer and what's the book?
I've
I would
literally
have
just had a
shared.
box delivered as well, so it's not normally that messy. I'll put a link
Well,
in, but it
listen,
does feel like that. You know that person that proposes at somebody else's wedding, and you just think,
yeah.
"What an arsehole." That's what
Well,
it feels like. So, thank you, Paula.
honestly, I'm just hoping if I recommend your book enough that you're going to offer to write mine for me so I don't have to do it. That's the truth of it. So I'm doing my best. We'll see how we go. I don't want to write it. Okay, so look, what I'm going to do now is talk to you a little bit about. So if I'm poo-pooing using the standard models to diagnose culture and saying it's symptomatic and split and all the things that I'm saying, what's the alternative? Well, I can give you what my alternative is. I'm not saying it's the single right way of doing this, but hopefully it gives you some inspiration to consider what yours looks like. And I think my starting point when I took the journey around looking at that list of rage and thinking about what the barriers were was really going to the point of considering this piece around readiness to change readiness, and are we, whenever we're looking to activate some sort of evolution or adaptation in culture, are we really considering in the traditional methods of the vision values behaviors cascade, are we really truly considering how ready our people are to understand what they're doing? And what I would say, so this is an adapted, as with everything for me, I'll have a look at the research. I'll think about from a pragmatic point of view, is a chief executive going to tell me, agree that eyes glass over on this, and do I need to play with it a little bit to get somebody to pay attention to me? But this is adapted from the COM-B model. So there's some underpinnings to it. You'll probably be able to recognize that I've reordered and just reset the language a little bit on it. But my view is that the vast majority of culture work focuses particularly around the area, number 3, really, about that building capability. So giving people training, giving them descriptions of what the values need to look like, and really trying to do that head piece, telling them what the purpose is and why that should be important to them. We think we're activating heart within that, but truthfully, it's all about business centric. This is what the business does. This is why you should care about it on a business level. And here's the skills and understanding that you need to drive things forward. Some of the things that are often really missing is the honest conversation of why we need to shift, what this evolution might be. And I don't know, for those of you that work in this space, I don't know if you're seeing this, but certainly in the UK, the markets are really skewy at the minute. The high growth businesses are slowing down and losing. They're on a kind of hockey stick growth. Well, hopefully they're on a hockey stick growth journey of dipping a bit before they go up again. But there's this kind of shame to the difficult stuff. Organizations try and hide that, and they try and tell the happy story at all points. And I think often we don't do the base work that we need to do, which is giving people the general awareness that things need to change. So whether that's hiding the good news or the bad news, or the tricky news because we think it's going to spook everybody, or not explaining to people how the cozy culture that they're currently working in isn't sustainable in the long term, we kind of don't have those tough conversations that really get people to understand why the deal is what it is moving forward, and how that really impacts them, and their responsibility to come with it, really. I'd suggest mindset is another piece that we really don't do well. We do a great job of getting everybody into observer mode and saying, them over there, they need to change. Let's get them to do this. So when we're activating our values, particularly you think about the work that happens with executive teams, they love telling us what everybody else needs to do to shift. But we keep them in that role of sponsorship and role model. And maybe we do a bit of coaching with them, but are we really spending time saying, your role is about enablement and creating the conditions for this change to happen? It's not just about showing people that you can be authoritative or proactive yourself. Sometimes it means stepping back out of the light to allow other people to bloom. Do we really have that conversation about the environment you need to create to prime other people's behaviors, or do we just allow them to go out and be the chief lion and hope that everyone else follows? And the fourth area I would talk about, and the one that we focused most of our work and practice around, is this piece around opportunity to act. So, we all know, I'm sure well, I can't remember the stats on transfer to learning, but I remember enough about them to know that it's rubbish when it comes to kind of training to getting people back into work. Often we do all of that stuff that we need to in a classroom or a sanitized environment, saying this is how you need to behave moving forward, but we then put people back into an operating system that's primed for the previous cultural norms, the previous behavioral narratives and beliefs, and then we wonder why everything stops back to surface. So there's a huge amount of stuff that we could be doing, we could be guiding and supporting organizations to do that we don't necessarily do. And so one of the things that we did to support on that is we built out a readiness checklist, which was about helping organizations, for those who are stuck in their change or kind of naively getting started and saying we've got the values on the cupcakes and we're ready to go. We work with them in terms of symptomatically, what are you noticing within your organization? Where are the barriers? Where are the blockers hitting? And encourage them then to go back and think, well, have we covered all the stages that we need to? So even at its very base, if we're just having conversations about this piece around change readiness with the different groups that we're operating within, and we're ensuring that we're supporting better true mindset awareness, personal responsibility priming, and also environmental priming, we're probably going to have a lot more success than we do in the way that we do it at the moment. I think there's a lot of, if we build it, they will come, and we all know that isn't true, which is one of the reasons that culture has got the reputation that it has. So how do we start to operationalize that? Well, let's talk a bit more about that, really. So one of the first things that we do is we look to change the conversation. So we never, ever talk about culture as sentiment. Well, I do, but saying that it's not sentiment, it's part sentiment, let's be honest. But these phrases like culture is how your people are feeling on a Sunday night, that's a part of culture. That is an outcome, one of lots of different outcomes that you have for culture. But if we're completely honest, our executive team, even the most moral, the most caring, the most supportive executive team does not have the bandwidth to care about how someone feels on a Sunday night when they are looking at what the board want them to look at in terms of goals, KPIs, return on investment, whatever it may be. If we want culture to be taken seriously, we need to align it to the behavioral drivers, or the kind of the core top 3 priorities that those executive teams have. And the truth is that it does align. It's just that the conversation has got really lazy. I'm getting a bit excited now, aren't I? Sorry, I'm getting Irish as I get grumpy about things. But I think what we've done is we've got to the place where we've stopped the conversation on culture at this piece of everyday experience. So I see it time and time again, HR leaders, business consultants, people commenting on my LinkedIn posts when I'm trying to talk about it as a performance lever, and they go, oh yeah, sad people can't do a great job. We stop at the point of saying, we know culture isn't good because engagement's low or people are unwell, etc. And we try and leverage the moral position. But the truth is that that is one part of the picture. Some of that is about energy well-being, but some of it is about what does this experience drive in terms of people's core beliefs about their work? So how is it driving their attitudes, which drives their day-to-day behavior, which drives their business results? So if we close this equation, we're much more likely to catch the attention of the people who have the capacity and the influence to influence the operating environment and reset the cultural system. So that would be my first point. is always finish the equation. Of course, we want to have the conversation about whether people are well and thriving. You know, sustainable culture has a well-being element. It has an engagement, a motivation element attached to it, but don't make that the whole part of your conversation. So that would be my very first piece to say to you. And we do that in a really kind of simple way. We step back whenever we're defining a great culture. We step back and we start the conversation with the business drivers. So we don't build behaviors on what people say they want a bit more of around here, or what will make them a bit more happier, or what will make this a great place to work. We start with, what does this business need to achieve? What are the challenges and opportunities that it needs to deal with in order to achieve that? Let's understand that, because that tells us the non-negotiables of what the culture needs to drive in terms of business outcomes and behavior. And then we soften that with a talent conversation that's saying, well, if we want to deliver that in a sustainable way where we're getting the best version of people in doing that and getting maximum results, how do we need people to be treated to pull those behaviors out in a way that's sustainable and effective and moral? So anchor on business performance, and then soften and make sustainable with those talent drivers instead. What's your thoughts on that? Make sense? What do you think? Yeah. Okay. So
I'm
absolutely.
curious, how would you have that conversation with someone who sees it all as the same thing? Who, when you say, okay, but no, focus on the business drivers. As far as they're concerned, half of their business drivers really is that employee experience, which is wonderful and sweet, but gets in the way of having this conversation. Have you had that happen before, where you're really struggling to divorce the two?
So what I often find is it's less that I think people can see the difference. Generally, it's just about the questions you ask. You know, if you ask a senior leader, I think what happens generally is they're just surprised. If you ask them some business driven questions, they're surprised because they're not used to that conversation, but they will go with you. Where the kickback generally is more is anxiety, because we want to be seen as a good employer, and we've probably got a psychological contract that says we look after our people, and if we do anything that looks like we're looking after the business results, it's perceived as aggressive or not what we're meant to be, etc. It's a really unhelpful psychological contract to have, actually, because it pulls the business down. It kind of sinks catches the business over time. So there's a piece about how do you balance that psychological contract. So often how we express great is less in values, which are often, even though we mean them to be really inclusive, they're quite top down in terms of how they're expressed, even if they're built bottom up. We do more of a deal. We articulate ideal culture around a deal. What is it that we need from you from a business perspective? And what is it that the business is going to give you to allow you to show up in that way, to allow you to succeed? And we also express it from an employee experience point of view, which is saying, this is how we want you to feel. While you're delivering this is how we want you to feel. So everything is that balanced piece around what does the business need and what's the business committing to give you, which is the true symbiotic, really, nature of it. Really great high performance cultures don't all have slides. They don't all have paid for canteens. What they have is a really clear, sustainable psychological contract that works. An example I often use with chief executives is, honestly, my first 5 or 6 years in consultancy, I was in the most cutthroat environment you can imagine. On my first day, I arrived in an office where nobody else did what I did. There was a phone book on the desk, a laptop that was already full of emails, and a post-it note that said, go and win some work. And they just wanted me to start ringing people. And I stayed in that business for 5 years. It didn't treat me any better, but what it did do was give me a ridiculous amount of experience that a junior consultant could never hope to have, that accelerated me through levels of my career that was probably 10 years ahead of where I should have been. And they also paid me stupidly well. And I was 24, and it paid for my, the deposit of my first house. So was I going to stay there for the next 20 years? Absolutely not. Did I work my socks off while I was there because they were giving me something that was worth while to me, and they were really clear that that's the promise that they were giving, and I knew what I had to give in return? Absolutely. And sometimes that's all right. Their resourcing model, the average consultant had about a 5.5 year tenure there. They were all in their early 20s. That worked for them. So it sometimes it's less about, well, all the time it's not always about what the deal is. It's more, is the deal clear, and is it going to attract the type of people that you need at the point in their life that you need them to deliver what's required. So I think it's that piece around pragmatism that business leaders really respond to. And actually, I find most of the time they are energized by the chance to talk about it differently rather than scared, because it's like, oh God, I don't just have to try and make everybody happy, which is a great thing. So yeah, it's but you do get some anxiety at times. So what I would say to you is coaching culture less as this is how our people feel, and more about it's how our business works. It's the thing that defines the behaviors that people choose, the decisions that they make. I'm always really, what's the word, like cognizant now in an AI age, that when you make a list of things that it looks like AI wrote it. This was before, I made this before ChatGPT existed, I promise, and its models. But it is very much, it's this living thing that's shaped by all of the systems, the signals, the stories, the experiences that we're having. And it has a massive influence then on how our people show up. So if we start to coach it in that way, we can have much greater influence with the people who want these things to be aligned to their commercial or their operating goals and priorities. So point one, change the conversation. The next thing I would say is move past surface level organization. So let's move on from the yokai, shall we? I slag it off loads as well, but it's fine. It does a thing. It just doesn't do what a lot of people think it does, and that's why they get caught. So absolutely tells you on a surface level, symptomatically, how your culture's showing up. Is it useful for a cultural audit to tell you what to change? Absolutely not. So stop just describing, start thinking about what's driving it. And so I'm going to give you a few ideas around how to do this. So again, we'll come back to this equation. How we started to build our method around this was two things, was considering this piece around everyday experience as our anchor. And I'm moving everyday experience from just sentiment, how I feel, into that piece around core beliefs as well, that then drive into that attitudes and behavior piece. If we really want to influence that, so we can influence attitudes and behaviors, we've got to stop thinking as culture purely as a reaction to stimuli. People's experience of work isn't just about their reaction to how we do things around here. And I'm sure a lot of you will have been caught in that world where staff surveys are driving you potty because everybody wants more leadership visibility, and it's completely an unreasonable expectation, or it's not possible to do. So I think we get this feedback and then we try and fix the environmental piece, like that's the only thing that we can influence. But the truth is that those pieces of feedback that we're getting about culture are also influenced by psychological contract and the expectation filter that's driven through. So we have to understand that as well, because if somebody expects to see their CEO every day and they only see them every 2 days, they're going to be irritated and negatively evaluate that. If they never expect to see them and they see them once a year, they're going to be, and they remember their name, they're going to be delighted. So we've got to think about that piece around psychological contract. So when we're evaluating culture, we look at it across 3 core things, really. Absolutely, we look at the observed experiences and norms. Thank you, Okai, for giving us the language to be able to do that. Let's redress the balance on being rude about that. But so we look at those observed experiences and norms. We talk about those. We build the story so we can influence around that. But we're also looking at the psychological contract. What is it that we're seeing in terms of what people's beliefs about what good is around here? What do they believe the give and get should be? Because that's telling us a lot about what their perceptual filter is about where good and bad is. And then what we're also doing is looking at the environmental nudges and drivers. So the everyday experience piece that's nudging into people, that's the environmental stimuli that's nudging into people, that's influencing their overall attitudes and beliefs. And that piece allows us to be able to have a much more rounded view of, well, what does it feel like? What does it look like around here? So how can we tell stories that feels that this is accurate? Why does it feel like that? And are those beliefs reasonable? So how do we action plan and influence around that? And where does the environment need to shift to allow that experience to align with what we're expecting people to do? So this piece is really about enablement. That environmental nudges and drivers is about creating this language of enablement in organizations, that if you want someone to turn up like this, You want them to be more accountable. If you hold them in an environment that's suppressing all sense of personal responsibility and accountability, then they will never be that thing, no matter how much you shout it, no matter how much you bring an Olympic a medalist in to talk about it. They will never be that thing. You have to do something that is influencing, and creating the environmental conditions for them to be able to do that. So we break it down in that way. And I'll talk to you for a minute about kind of a couple of the different things that we do, and then we'll open it up to questions, because I've got a bit excited and slagging everything off at the start, and I'm running over a bit. So I'll give you this, and let's have a chat about it. But we kind of, in terms of psychological contract, all of the stuff that we do, we kind of break into some typologies to start the conversation, and then we do a more in-depth, tailored analysis for each of the organizations that we're working with. But generally what we do is work on this sort of matrix of where's the balance between the prioritization of colleague experience versus the focus on business needs and priorities, and is that right for where the business needs to be? Now, if we want sustainable long-term peak performance, we need to balance business needs with colleague experience and colleague needs. So that piece around business focus with enablement creates that. But there are plenty of businesses that we work with that live quite happily in this sweatshop space, actually. But as I mentioned, my early career experience, their talent model is very different from those with more sustainable piece. They're probably got people in for short life cycles, for immediate payoffs and things, their reward, etc. And what you get on the other side. I think Google, certainly the last time I properly looked at Google in any depth before everybody stopped saying they wanted to be them anymore, they played in this model. We can say what we like, but actually they made it really easy for people to give themselves 20 hours a day to their work, and their average tenure was about 3.5 years, but they just made it really nice while you were there doing that. They made it really easy for you to do that. So it's always contentious when I say that, but when you kind of dig beneath the surface of it, it was a really good way to get people totally committed to the organization for a short period of time, for a while. And the Cozy Club one, we have a lot of those within the UK, often environments where they sell a huge promise around employee experience and comfort. And often a lot of our public services and not-for-profit sector live in this world where the employee need comes first over the business need. There's a lot of work that's happening in the UK at the moment to help organisations redress that balance. We've probably about 70% of our work is working with organizations that are trying to deal with the tighter markets and faster changing world, because they're just, that Cozy Club is set up for kind of stable mediocrity. That's probably the best way to say it. It works, and but it doesn't work fantastically. So what we do is we look to try and understand the current psychological contract and what might be going on there. So really get to the core beliefs of what people believe good looks like and what they should expect from the organization. And that helps us to redress the balance. And this, she says, scanning it very quickly, I know it's anonymized, is an anonymized version of some of the core beliefs that we picked up from a client that we worked with about 18 months ago, where we're listening in the focus groups, not just to what people say they want, but what they're saying they value, which I think allows us to have a really different conversation about how you want to move things forward. And then the only other pragmatic bit that I wanted to share with you today really was this piece around kind of creating the conditions for change. So the driver mapping. And this is relatively hot off the press, actually. We built our original model on this about 5 years ago, doing a thematic analysis. Don't ask me about the data protection piece on it, because good to see you, Danny. That's because I've done the book recommendation, isn't it? I know what's happening. I'll see you later.
See you. This has been fabulous. I'll catch you later, Paula.
Thank
Lovely
you.
to meet everyone.
But we built the original model off a thematic analysis of I think in the end it was about 52 different cultural audits that I'd done or I'd had access to through my career, to give us an indication of what are the things that consultants are most often saying influence culture. And we used that to start to map, when we were getting feedback about the system, what's going on within the operating environment and how aligned is that to the ideal culture that the organisation has. Now, excitingly, we've been collecting data on that now, as I say, for the last 4 or 5 years, not only with our own clients, but we open sourced a short version of the tool, and we got nearly 1,000 cases of data from over 800 different organizations that allowed us to do a huge factor analysis to get a sense of what factors were most likely predicting the variance of a number of outcome variables, both around experience, but also performance and different organizational modes. And what we find from that research was that there were full disclosure, there were 5 core factors. The expectation alignment one is one that we've added to revalidate because we wanted to integrate psychological contract into the model because that's so important. But we find that the factor analysis pulled out 5 core areas for us that seemed, well, predicted up to 62% of the variance of the outcome variables running through. So it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I had to send it to some other people to check that I was reading the data right, because I've not seen numbers like that before. So we're pretty delighted, if I'm completely honest. But what it indicated was that, and what we find is that rather than talking on that aspirational, this is how we hope people will behave around here, what we do is we take the ideal culture that we define with the business, we look at their operating environment, and basically we rag rate this this kind of framework, saying, well, if you want to be that, this is how close you are. That these particular environmental nudges are close or not to predicting that. So that allows us to have much more pragmatic conversations with organizations that isn't saying things like empower people more or be more visible. It's saying, look at your strategic planning and think about how you balance that against demand, etc., to allow you to work through. And I'll just share this very quickly with you. This is when we did some further kind of regression stuff, really, to check how the factors work with the outcome variables. Most of them predicted quite different things. So it works really nicely in terms of understanding, if I tweak this bit of the system, these are the things that I'm more likely to be able to get out. So I guess my call to action here is start thinking about, or if you are thinking about it already, lean into this piece around not just what is happening around here and what is the list of things that we need to change, but why is it happening around here from a psychological contract and an environmental priming point of view, and what is it that we need to do to the ecosystem to try and influence that moving forward, and really think about how we can drive that in a meaningful way to allow us to have much more pragmatic conversations. And don't be scared of sharing the whole system with the organization. You know, we share this whole model with the right from the executive team down, and we use this to create leadership prescriptions, management prescriptions, etc., that allow us to work with that group to say, so if half of these things are red and amber, what is within your gift and your remit and your span of control that you need to influence to make this happen? So it allows action planning to be much more multifaceted and multi-layered across the organization. The last thing I'm going to say to you is just, if you're interested in this and you want some more information, we have a shed load of free resources on this. That probably the most interesting place to go, for me anyway, because I'm obsessed with it, is that we've got a short little research paper on the CCSQ, the driver map research that I talked about, that you can download from our website. You can try out our kind of surface level culture index. I will say to you that this research is 2.5 months old, so I haven't yet redesigned this to put it through. This is our free kind of data collection engine, so you'll see what the old model looked like if you wanted to play with it. But there's also access to our free dip test change readiness index there. And if you're not bored of the sound of my voice, we've got a digital course that deep dives into this too, that you can get access to as well. But you know, it's just nice to talk to you about it, so I'm not trying to convince you of that. So I hope that's helpful. I've talked more than I promised. I'm sorry, but happy to do whatever's helpful at this stage.
No, it was wonderful. Also, we got to have a conversation throughout it. So you may have felt like it was a lot of you talking, but there were also parts where we got to share our own feedback and go back and forth. So one of the things when I think about the ideal culture and I hear about that, from what I've heard you explain so far, sounds to me like, okay, the ideal culture shouldn't be defined based on how many people are smiling as they walk through the door. The ideal culture should be defined based on these are the business needs, and are people contentedly completing the business needs? Is that bastardization, would you say?
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. I think the challenge is that that happiness has become the goal over the last while with culture work, when in fact it should be a really good outcome to an effective culture. So if we create a great culture, people feel listened to, if they feel enabled, if they feel supported, if they've got if work flows friction free, happiness, well-being, etc., is a positive outcome. So stop trying to get to that just by influencing sentiment, and fix the operating system, and that becomes an outcome. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
And so a follow-up question, because as we talk about happiness can be the goal and it can be distracting often when it
Mm.
comes to these book club type companies. You and Danny were discussing earlier about how a lot of this stuff comes from military research, industrial revolution type thing. Roughly, I don't need an exact year or something, but I am wondering, where did this shift come from? If it started with like sweatshops and factories and military, and now we're to the point where, painting with a broad brush here, there's a tendency to value being or to prioritize being happy and assuming that should be the goal more than the business outcome. Was there a key time that this switched, or has it just been a gradual progression?
I think it's been a gradual progression, but I almost feel a bit guilty really, because I worked in a wellbeing focused consultancy about, oh gosh, 10 or nearly 15 years ago now. The wellbeing revolution probably started, didn't it? Well, certainly in the UK, it started 10 or 15 years ago. And I think it was in HR, and also probably in occupational health and safety, and it created this big stick around happiness that I think separated culture from performance. The lift was wrong. As culture was lifting, it should have lifted into a performance point of view, but it lifted into the well-being sphere. And I think COVID rapidly escalated it, because that really became
Mm.
about care, connection, support, and it was right. It was right that people's happiness and safety was the single priority for a while, but nothing has calibrated. And I would say culture's got a PR problem these days. It's not that any of that is true. It has all of the benefits and opportunities, but it's just the common belief. So HR training, psychological practice has not caught up with the evolution. We are not educating the world of work. And also suppliers, it's really easy to sell a silver bullet where nothing really needs to change. So I think that the supplier market has a huge thing to answer around this, of stopping focusing on ease to route to market and focusing more on actually making a difference, which my marketing manager hates me for, because she wants me to go for ease to route to market, but I'd prefer to make a difference.
Well, I actually really do appreciate how you state that we're behind. The more times I like do research and get more involved and kind of listen more, like it's more and more just like, oh, wait a second, I just went to school and got all the academic aspects in. Oh, by the way, we're actually 20 years behind. Like you have to like skill up. You got your degree, congratulations. Now it's time for you to skill up to catch up to what you
Yeah.
actually missed. Now, it's interesting that you guys brought up the military perspective. You're not like to answer, gosh, I cannot pronounce your name for the
I like to pronounce it D'Artagnan, but there's a thousand ones out there. Go ahead, Jonathan.
D'Artagnan.
Yeah.
Um, like I've noticed with like the historical context of the military, being a veteran myself, it was more of like trial and error. We failed these people, we failed this people. We probably have to add this. We failed, add this. Like the concepts of PTSD are actually brand new. They're only like 10, 20 years old. So psychological safety is just catching up to us. And so I found your lecture interesting. Now, with the United, I know that you're talking about the United Kingdom. How, what was your perspective, and how are you seeing the just-in-time philosophies? I've seen a lot of talk about the Generation Z, their expectations on everything being instantaneous. How is this being influenced into this perspective? I'm sorry.
I, I think it absolutely does have influence. I think the bigger influence for the newer generations coming into work is actually more about the role of work for them. So I think one of the reasons there is so much friction at the moment isn't actually they just want everything and that's unreasonable. I think they want work to be part of a good life, and the world of work has settled in norms of the lunatics like me who thought that you just had to give your whole life to work. That's how the system is set up. So there's this real tension that's happening at the minute, that the system is demonizing those who are saying post-COVID, or because of generational differences or the like, that that actually I expect to be respected and enabled and supported at work, not just barked at and told to find a solution, no matter how much friction or lack of enablement there is in the environment. So for me, that's the bigger conversation: is the world of work is becoming more complex, it's becoming faster paced, it's always on, markets are much more volatile, global impact is much more far reaching than it's ever been, in terms of everyone feeling the shock and that impacting confidence. And if we don't pay attention to that and evolve what we expect from our people and how we enable them to succeed in that environment, then, well, I don't really know what's going to happen. I'm interested to see. My hope is that the big behemoths who are refusing to change because this is how it's always been done just start to shrink and die on the vine, because the talent votes with its feet. But I guess we'll see what happens, really. The real war is going to be talent over the next few years. Those who've got the abilities to adapt and manage the new world of work would be my view. And that'll be the differentiator for success or not. Because as much as AI is brilliant for efficiency, it does not have the capability for innovation, leverage and application, really responding to different customer needs and experience. We don't even realize the damage that we've done with the rushed adoption that businesses have done recently. So there's a really interesting 10, 15, goodness knows how many years ahead. We'll have to see.
I think I completely 100% agree with you on that. I've been doing so much research in terms of that philosophy, but yeah, it's crazy times.
For sure, for sure. Interesting times as well, isn't it?
And I'm go ahead and I'll use that as the time to say, okay, in these interesting times, we're already 1 minute over.
Sorry.
Paula, oh, you're fine. If it was an issue, I'd make it an issue. Paula, thank you so much for just speaking on this topic and sharing not just your approach, but what has worked, what hasn't worked. And yeah, it's been wonderful getting to see more about the actual recent research and relevant research for this topic. Also, Jonathan, thank you for staying around. And I always love getting to hear the questions that you have when it comes to different
Thank you so
sessions like
much.
these. For those who join late or who watch the recording, I'll go ahead and share the little slide once more, just so it's the last image on here. Again, we're doing this. We'll have about 4 panelists next time talking about healthcare. And I hope to see you all there too. Paula, thanks again. Rigo, thank you again for just making this something I get to enjoy as well by running the tech side of things. And I hope to see you all again next month.
Appreciate you all. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Paula.
Bye.
Thanks, D'Artagnan.
Yeah.
See you, Jonathan.